Welcome back to Not Super But Human. My name's Will. I'll be your guide. So, previously in the Hero's Journey framework, we had talked about the world you know, which is, normal everyday life that the hero lives in before they take their journey towards personal growth. And then we talked about the call to adventure. So, the call to adventure being that moment that makes the individual question kind of the life they're living and the life in general and where they fit into it. It's that idea that there's something more than what they've currently been living with in their everyday world. The next step we're going to talk about today is accepting the call to adventure. So, this is when the individual, after having received the call to adventure, decides that they're no longer going to stay in the same world they've been living in. They stop asking, what if? What would it look like if I lived differently? And it really shifts to, I'm ready to live differently than I have. And, these moments can be dramatic, but they're oftentimes subtle. And, when I think about, um, my own, call to adventure and then subsequently accepting the call, it was that moment where I decided, I was going to do something about the mental health I was experiencing at the time. And I admitted myself into the hospital, and that choosing to admit myself in the hospital at a time where I needed to ensure my own safety, um, that was me accepting my call to adventure. And so it kind of the reason I bring that up is to highlight the fact that it's not always dramatic, or they're not even just they don't it doesn't have to be grandiose. It's a shift. It's taking a meaningful shift from where you are, the person you currently are, to where you want to be headed. Um, it's not about certainty, but it's taking that initial leap. It's also not about motivation or clarity. Um, what it really comes down to is it's decision and responsibility. When we look at existentialism, we are responsible for our actions, and we always have a certain degree of choice in our lives, but we don't always implement our ability to make good choices, allowing others to make these choices for us. And so accepting the call to adventure is is that point where you begin to accept that you have choice. You begin to accept the idea that you have autonomy towards rewriting your own story, or that you're even capable of rewriting your story. It doesn't have to be clear on what exactly that looks like yet. Again, accepting the call to adventure does not mean you know what the entire path ahead of you entails. It just means you're willing to take that first step while you figure it out. It can look like many different things. Like I said, it doesn't have to be grandiose, but for many, like for instance, individuals in recovery, it's entering into treatment. Or people that might find themselves in similar situations to me, it's admitting to the hospital. It could be ending a relationship, shifting careers, really anything that causes you to want to take that initial step towards something more purposeful than the life you are currently living, and to any capacity. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't touch on how Joseph Campbell portrayed accepting the call to adventure, in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, at least a little bit. Now, just to recap for some of you, Joseph Campbell is the individual that identified the framework of the hero's journey through his book, or his study of world mythology that he talks about in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Now, how he portrayed this stage of the hero's journey is, the hero accepted their call to adventure through coming into contact with the threshold guardian. Now, crossing that first threshold into their journey, they came face to face with the threshold guardian. Now, this threshold guardian is, you know, not an evil entity, but it's the idea is it's meant to keep the individual inside the bounds of the world they live in, not out of malicious intent, but because the world beyond the world the hero knows is dangerous. And so the threshold guardian is a representation of leaving the safety of what you know and acknowledging the dangers of the unknown. Now, the while the unknown is dangerous, it must also be faced and can become known. And that's really what the everyday hero, accepting their call to adventure, aims to do. Like I said before, it's not about clarity. There's going to be much that is unknown when leaving, their everyday world into their own hero's journey. But it's a step that is necessary if they want to make the changes that they haven't been able to make in the present life they've been living. Now, some factors keep the individual from crossing that threshold, or just makes crossing the threshold harder. Like, what if I fail? What if, what if I'm not successful? Or I've attempted change in the past, but I haven't been able to do it. And so, what if I fail again? Or am I even capable of making a positive change? And it's not, wrong, bad to question, but really overcoming that self doubt, at least in just those initial moments, you just have to conquer that self doubt once in that moment. You'll have to do it again, but focusing one moment at a time. So, when preparing to cross over that threshold, moving beyond the threshold guardian, there will be doubt, but you face it with courage and you step beyond the barrier. And in crossing that barrier, let's revisit the stages of change. So, the world I liken to the pre-contemplation stage of change. The call to adventure becoming contemplation, so contemplating that change is possible, there may be something better. When you cross that threshold, accept your call to adventure, you move into the preparation stage of change. Now, in the preparation stage of change, you actually start to plan. You begin to plan the changes you're going to make. Now, again, you're not going to know everything or you may not, you may not know all of the changes you're trying to make in that moment, but you're at least planning what you can. And even if you have to do it a day at a time, and then eventually, build up from there. But the point is, you're no longer thinking about change. You are actively making steps forward. Now, there isn't a limit to the types of emotions that can occur with accepting the call to adventure and being in the preparation stage of change. But the two that most readily come to my mind that you may experience are excitement and anxiety. Um, you may have that inherent sense of vitality in moving into something different and knowing that you're going to be working towards positive changes. It may, for some people that really revitalizes them. But then the anxiety piece comes from the unknown, not having full clarity in the journey you're taking. It's inherently anxiety inducing to not know everything that's ahead of you. So the trick here is to make sure that's tempered with your excitement. And that is something that can be achieved, through the attitude you take towards the choices ahead of you. Revisiting that existentialism piece, we have choice, and we're not in control of everything that happens to us. That it would be ignorant to say so. For me to come and tell you, you are in control of everything that happens, that would be not only incorrect but harmful. You aren't in control of everything that happens to you. However, you are always in control of the attitude you take. And in fact, that's one of the ways that Viktor Frankl identifies that we find meaning in our lives. It's the attitude we take towards our unavoidable suffering. And it can be very easy to let negative situations, environments, people keep us from affecting choice in our lives that would move us towards positive change. And I think to some degree, everyone has. I know I have. And we don't take our ability to make choices. We relinquish that responsibility. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to crossing that threshold, accepting your call to adventure, you are making a choice to do so. And so, on the flip side of that, many times in our lives, I'm sure we've all, chosen not to step beyond, chosen not to make the steps necessary towards that positive change. And I know many times it's easy to push that onto others. Oh, I didn't have a choice. So I did, I chose not to do. Now, here's the thing, since we always have choice, choosing not to act or choosing not to move forward is a choice. Choosing to allow our outside circumstances to dictate how we move through our lives, that is a choice. We need to accept a certain degree of ownership. Now, in the work I do as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, I work with many individuals that are mandated for treatment. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard, I had to be here. I didn't have a choice. And I always say, hold on, that's BS. There's always a choice. You had a choice. You chose treatment. The other option, you simply did not like the consequences. Now, just because there are consequences with the other choice, it doesn't mean that there was, no choice to be able to be made. And so it's about identifying, what circumstances are outside of your control and what is inside of your control. And with that, always being mindful of your attitude with it. I know I talked on that briefly before, but in the context of individuals that are mandated for treatment, they feel they didn't have a choice, but still affected that ability to choose by going to treatment. Their attitude in response to that choice or the factors leading up to it is going to play a big part in the choices they make moving forward and whether or not they'll make the most of their situation. And it's really the same with with anything. When choices feel limited, we need to find what is within our control. And we are always in control of the attitude we take. This is when we accept the authorship that we have in rewriting our own stories, from the ones that are problematic to strength based. When crossing the threshold, what's important is identifying unique outcomes, in your life. These are times where you look back and you identify moments in your life that you did not let the problem win. So asking yourself questions like, when did I face, a trial in my life and it turned out better than I expected it to? Or when was I facing a problem and things didn't get worse? How did I keep them from getting worse? Or if I was facing this problem in my life before and I succeeded, I didn't let the problem win, what was that? You're really seeking to identify how the problem doesn't own you. And in the past, there are situations that allowed you to overcome it so that you can feel that confidence in your ability to overcome it now. Now, in accepting your call to adventure, being in the preparation stage of change, affecting your ability to choose, and identifying unique outcomes, this is also the point of the journey where you begin that goal setting. And there are many different ways to go about goal setting. I know what I've used in my work, and a lot of individuals use because it works, is SMART goal setting. Um, so making sure your goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time oriented. And so this really helps you to kind of make the changes you want to make in your life real. It's not like, someday I want to own my own business. Well, SMART goals are about breaking it down. So you're able to determine at least somewhat what your path towards that goal looks like. Now, SMART goal setting isn't the only way to goal set. I know there's a packet I've used called Meaningful and Purposeful Goal Setting, which is really fantastic. It's based on logotherapy developed by Viktor Frankl. Um, but in my book, I actually created what I call the heroic path model. So PATH. And so, what it stands for is purpose, anticipation, transformation, and heroic action. It's really about identifying what brings you a sense of purpose in your life, or why is the journey you're about to take meaningful for you. Anticipation is really just that. It's anticipating the trials you are going to face ahead of you on your journey. Now, again, you're not going to be able to anticipate every trial, but what trials, challenges do you feel like you may come across? That's where the anticipation comes in, but it's also about identifying who individuals are in your life that, for simplicity, we call them enemies, but it doesn't always mean that they're enemies. It just means that these are individuals in your life that may make it more difficult for you to live your life, or make it more difficult for you to reach the goals that you're striving for. Then on the flip side of that, anticipation is where you identify the supports in your life. Who are your allies? Who are your mentors? What can you learn from them? How can they support you specifically on your journey? And then you create a plan around that. Transformation is envisioning how you see yourself transforming through your journey, identifying how you would like to be different, because through the hero's journey, and I know Campbell often described the cycle of symbolic death and rebirth. If you follow your hero's journey, you're not going to be completely the same at the end as when you started, and that's where that transformation piece is. So envisioning how you see yourself changing. And then heroic action is taking the plan that you put in place, the anticipation, the, what you see, how you see yourself transforming, and putting it into heroic action. And that heroic action is really just about crossing that threshold, making that first choice on the journey toward just the purpose you want in life. And there will be challenges in crossing that particular threshold. What challenges are that's going to be different for everybody, but one that may commonly come up is that vulnerability piece. Crossing beyond and not knowing what's ahead, there is an inherent vulnerability. And individuals in your life may not fully understand why they're taking this particular journey. And it could be even friends or family. But the thing to consider is it's not their role to understand why you're taking your journey. What's important is you know why you're taking your journey, the purpose behind it. Their role is to support you. Now, whether they support you or not on a particular journey is their choice. But then how you navigate your relationships, in response, to this, that is up to you. And so this is where it is really important to be honest with yourself who your allies and supports are on this particular journey. Before we end here today, there are just a couple of questions I want you to consider. The first one, why? Why is your journey important to you? And then the next question is what? What is the first step you're going to take? Remember, you don't have to feel ready to accept your call to adventure. Uncertainty is normal. You will experience discomfort on your journey, but the decision to embark on your journey is the turning point for you towards making meaningful change in your life.